So how many times have you heard someone calling a game underrated gem, and the way it's classified is always different? That's because it has different values for each person because of how the game is structured. And in the bigger picture, this also applies to every single game out there. But as it stands, games tend to get generalized and they can even lose value.
Well, that was 5 bolts wasted.
The prime example for this is Deadly Premonition. It was so polarizing when it came out. You either heard that the game is terrible or it's amazing, or you could even call it both. But there was no real in-between reaction. If you've watched Twin Peaks, then that is practically the movie/serial version of Deadly Premonition. Technically it's vice versa because Twin Peaks was obviously created way earlier than DP. So, you typically value a game on its graphical or technical vigor, story and gameplay, music and mechanics. But the way DP is valued is actually none of those things on their own. All of them come together. Well, how is that? The game is practically Resident Evil 4 at its core shooting gameplay, okay, but then it has clunky driving sequences, so it's an open world game at that point. The main driving, pardon the pun, point for the game is its mystery plot. And the key word here is mystery. The game allows itself to be everything at the same time, all because of mystery. It's a driving force for the player to continue and potentially get to the bottom of it. It's a concept that can always bring intrigue, and the further you get in Deadly Premonition, the more you realize that the driving and shooting and even puzzles are all a necessary force to move the game along. Which brings us to a point: you can't generalize a game as much as you think you can. Take Nier or Nier Automata as examples. They bring together multiple genres to their cores and
all of this just works.
So at that point you can either respect that value or disregard it. Did you come in expecting a twin-stick shooter? No? You hated it? Wait, you liked it? Deadly Premonition is the incarnation that it's all up to you as to how you view a game. It's not for everyone, but the aspects that it falls flat on don't really matter. The other concept of it's so bad that it's good doesn't apply here in my opinion, because nearly everything the game does is at least decent, it's just the execution that falters. But that's the point, nothing can ever be perfect. At some points of the game you might even think that things are this way by design, because if it was a realistic or balanced game without the subtones of goofy, sad, happy, depressing, or even scary, then it might be a different game altogether. It's easy to picture and imagine a scenario where the game looks perfect and the mechanics are all rounded out, but would it even be the same game then? Take for example some remasters or remakes. Secret of Mana is a very recent example. The original pixel art version of the game looks better than its remake counterpart that just came out. The atmosphere and design sacrifices that they had to make for a polygon version just didn't suit their budget. So if they just remastered or remade the pixel art with some improvements, it would have been an overall better release of this version. So Deadly Premonition did actually have a director's cut for the PS3 which tried to tweak or make the visuals better. It wasn't a remaster, but it changed the atmosphere as well, for better or worse. So I think Secret of Mana could have adopted a similar approach, just changed the pixel art a bit. The next game that encompasses a mystery thriller plot is Oxenfree, which is a linear indie game without any shooting gameplay or subgenres. You're constantly being pushed to continue and you have no idea what could happen next. Even if you think about all the cliches and writing techniques that are possible, there isn't enough of the thriller genre in gaming. More often than not, it's successful and there are practically endless opportunities to expand upon it. Psychological games that don't rely on jump scares also fit that bill. So, say you have a game which is more of an experience rather than an approach like gameplay comes first. There is this expectancy which can influence an opinion, especially if it was in development for a while. I'm not saying any of this as an excuse for any shortcomings of a developer, quite the opposite. If people can see past the surface, they'd probably change their mind. I still see this even with new releases. People will judge a game off of the first couple of hours rather than actually continuing it and potentially finishing it to give their full opinion. And not just people, critics do it, everyone does it. You might say, but if the first impressions are bad, why continue? Well, that's the point. It's some people's job to do that, and they fail on that aspect. Be it individuals or even established websites. The underrated gem comes into play when that happens. Some time will pass and then it'll be suddenly remembered for something unique that it did and hasn't been done since. People then see past the surface and notice the values. Basically, the point of the initial impressions have worn out, and people form their own opinions and others agree with it, or try the game and question themselves and go from there. Speaking of value, reviews themselves can also get very dated, especially from media outlets. If I were to imagine that most reviewers revisit their own opinion, it might be changed at one point. Or in the current day and age where some titles evolve, it could be an entirely changed game. That's why you can't really review free-to-play or games as a service, or if you do, it's not classified as a review. So now, if you actually do re-reviews of something, I've seen this with many ports by the way, the score can get artificially higher or lower. It's very arbitrary. And at that point, people know it's bullshit because they've tried the game themselves and they're pointing out the review or reviewer for it. However, all of this can also be in reverse. A game or a part of it can de-evolve, not to mention the online portions. I'm looking at this shit right here.